We're in the last part of chapter 6. The sea cows went on slooping and grazing and chumping in the weed, and Kotick asked them questions in every language that he had picked up in his travels, and the sea people talked nearly as many languages as human beings. But the sea cows did not answer, because sea cow cannot talk. He has only 6 bones in his neck where he ought to have 7, and they say under the sea that prevents him from speaking even to his companions. But, as you know, he has an extra joint in his foreflipper, and by waving it up and down and about, he makes his answers in a sort of clumsy telegraphic code. By daylight, Kotick's mane was standing on end, and his temper was gone where the dead crabs go. Then the sea cow began to travel northward very slowly, stopping to hold absurd bowing councils from time to time, and Kotick followed them, saying to himself, "People who are such crazies as these would have been killed long ago if they hadn't found some safe island. And what is good enough for the sea cow is good enough for the sea catch. All the same, I wish they'd hurry." It was weary work for Kotick. The herd never went more than 40 or 50 miles a day and stopped to feed at night and kept close to the shore all the time, while Kotick swam round them and over them and under them, but he could not hurry them up 1/2 mile. As they went farther north, they held a bowing council every few hours, and Kotick nearly bit off his mustache with impatience till he saw that they were following up a warm current of water. And then he respected them more. One night, they sank through the shiny water, sank like stones, and for the first time since he had known them, began to swim quickly. Kotick followed, and the pace astonished him, for he had never dreamed that Sea Cow was anything of a swimmer. They headed for a cliff by the shore, a cliff that ran down into deep water and plunged into a dark hole at the foot of it, 20 fathoms under the sea. It was a long, long swim, and Kotick badly wanted fresh air before he was out of the dark tunnel they led him through. "My wig," he said when he rose, gasping and puffing into open water at the farther end. "It was a long dive, but it was worth it." The sea cows had separated and were browsing lazily along the edges of the finest beaches that Kotick had ever seen. There were long stretches of smooth, worn rock running for miles, exactly fitted to make seal nurseries, and there were playgrounds of hard sand sloping inland behind them, and there were rollers for seals to dance in, and long grass to roll in, and sand dunes to climb up and down, and best of all, Kotick knew by the feel of the water, which never deceives a true sea catch, that no men had ever come here. The first thing he did was to assure himself that the fishing was good, and then he swam along the beaches and counted up the delightful, low sandy islands half hidden in the beautiful rolling fog. Away to the northward, out to sea, ran a line of bars and shoals and rocks that would never let a ship come within 6 miles of the beach. And within the islands and the mainland was a stretch of deep water that ran up to the perpendicular cliffs, and somewhere below the cliffs was the mouth of the tunnel. "It's Novastoshnah over again, but 10 times better," said Kotick. "Sea Cow must be wiser than I thought. Men can't come down the cliffs, even if there were any men, and the shoals to seaward would knock a ship to splinters. If any place in the sea is safe, this is it." He began to think of the seal he had left behind him, but though he was in a hurry to go back to Novastoshnah, he thoroughly explored the new country so that he would be able to answer all questions. Then he dived and made sure of the mouth of the tunnel and raced through to the southward. No one but a sea cow or a seal would have dreamed of there being such a place, and when he looked back at the cliffs, even Kotick could hardly believe that he had been under them. It took him 6 days to come home, though he was not swimming slowly, and when he hauled out just above Sea Lion's neck, the first person he met was the seal who had been waiting for him. And she saw by the look in his eyes that he had found his island at last. But the holluschickie and sea catch, his father, and all the other seals laughed at him when he told them what he had discovered, and a young seal about his own age said, "This is all very well, Kotick, but you can't come from no one knows where and order us off like this. Remember, we've been fighting for our nurseries, and that's a thing you never did. You preferred prowling about in the sea." The other seals laughed at this, and the young seal began twisting his head from side to side. He had just married that year and was making a great fuss about it. I've no nursery to fight for, said Kotick. I only want to show you all a place where you will be safe. What's the use of fighting? Oh, if you're trying to back out, of course I've no more to say, said the young seal with an ugly chuckle. Will you come with me if I win? Said Kotick, and a green light came into his eye, for he was very angry at having to fight at all. Very good, said the young seal carelessly. If you win, I'll come. He had no time to change his mind, for Kotick's head was out and his teeth sunk in the blubber of the young seal's neck. Then he threw himself back on his haunches and hauled his enemy down the beach, shook him and knocked him over. Then Kotick roared to the seals, I've done my best for you these 5 seasons past. I've found you the island where you'll be safe, but unless your heads are dragged off your silly necks, you won't even believe. I'm going to teach you now. Look out for yourselves. Limmerston told me that never in his life, and Limmerston sees 10,000 big seals fighting every year. Never in all his little life did he see anything like Kotick's charge into the nurseries. He flung himself at the biggest sea catch he could find, caught him by the throat, choked him and bumped him and banged him till he grunted for mercy, and then threw him aside and attacked the next. You see, Kotick had never fasted for 4 months, as the big seals did every year, and his deep-sea swimming trips kept him in perfect condition, and, best of all, he had never fought before. His curly white mane stood up with rage, and his eyes flamed, and his big dog teeth glistened, and he was splendid to look at. Old Sea Catch, his father, saw him tearing past, hauling the grizzled old seals about as though they had been halibut, and upsetting the young bachelors in all directions. And Sea Catch gave a roar and shouted, He may be a fool, but he's the best fighter on the beaches. Don't tackle your father, my son. He's with you. Kotick roared in answer, and old Sea Catch waddled in with his mustache on end, blowing like a locomotive, while Matka and the seal that was going to marry Kotick cowered down and admired their menfolk. It was a gorgeous fight, for the two fought as long as there was a seal that dared lift up his head, and when there were none, they paraded grandly up and down the beach, side by side, bellowing. At night, just as the northern lights were winking and flashing through the fog, Kotick climbed a bare rock and looked down on the scattered nurseries and the torn and bleeding seals. Now, he said, I've taught you your lesson. My wig, said old Sea Catch, boosting himself up stiffly, for he was terribly mauled. The killer whale himself could not have cut them up worse. Son, I'm proud of you, and what's more, I'll come with you to your island, if there is such a place. Here, you fat pigs of the sea, who comes with me to the sea cow's tunnel? Answer, or I shall teach you. Again, roared Kotick. There was a murmur like the ripple of the tide all up and down the beaches. We will come, said thousands of tired voices. We will follow Kotick, the white seal. Then Kotick dropped his head between his shoulders and shut his eyes proudly. He was not a white seal any more, but red from head to tail. All the time, he would have scorned to look at or touch one of his wounds. A week later, he and his army, nearly 10,000 holluschickie and old seals, went away north to the sea cow's tunnel, Kotick leading them, and the seals that stayed at Novastoshnah called them crazy. But next spring, when they all met off the fishing banks of the Pacific, Kotick's seals told such tales of the new beaches beyond Sea Cow's tunnel that more and more seals left Novastoshnah. Of course, it was not all done at once, for the seals are not very clever, and they need a long time to turn things over in their minds. But year after year, more seals went away from Novastoshnah and Lukannon and the other nurseries to the quiet, sheltered beaches where Kotick sits all the summer through, getting bigger and fatter and stronger each year, while the holluschickie play around him in that sea where no man comes. Next, we'll read chapter 7. It's called Lukannon, and it's a poem. I'll see you then.